Hello there, my name's Sarah and I work at the Mullany Fund. Now today I'm going to talk to you about student finance and universal funding. I know it doesn't sound like the most interesting of talks as a student, but it's a really important area to get your head around, as there's an awful lot of information out there about student finance and the dreaded phrase student debt. Some of the information is true, but a lot isn't accurate and it's hard to know what's what. So this talk is designed to give you some simple points about what sort of funding you can expect if you would like to go to university in the future. There's no two ways about it. University costs money, but you also don't have to be rich to go, as there's an awful lot of support available. So this talk will be useful for Year 12 students who are thinking of going to university, but also really for anyone who's thinking of going to university in the future. The figures are relevant to students starting in September 2021, but if you're thinking of starting later, they should also be very useful. So let's look first at the cost of university. We've already said that it's true it isn't free, so it's certainly worth considering the expense and what you can expect to receive as support. Broadly speaking, there are two main costs, which are tuition fees and living costs. Taking the first one, tuition. This is what universities charge every year for the pleasure of being taught. Now this is set at £9,000 per year in Wales and £9,250 in the rest of the UK. Now this does sound really scary, but there is a lot of financial support available should you wish to go. So don't be put off. We'll look at the support available in a minute. So that's tuition fees. And now we're looking at living costs. This is everything else you will need to cover university outside of fees. So for example, it can include things like rent if you're away from home, phone bills, clothes, food, and socialising unfortunately isn't free either. So those are the two main areas of cost. So tuition fees first of all. This is the amount that the universities charge every year. And the first big message is there's no upfront costs. Nobody expects you to have £9,000 in your back pocket to go to university. So if you're a Welsh student, you can get a full tuition fee loan and the government will pay the university in your name every year and you pay it back when you finish. So when you start, you don't need to worry about that £9,000. The government lends it to you and pays the university direct. You do pay it back at the end, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but basically tuition fees are really easy to get your head around. So let's talk about the other side of things, living costs. And living costs are everything else it costs to be a student at university. Almost all Welsh students will receive a grant to help them with their living costs. Now a grant is basically free money that you don't have to pay back. Sometimes it can not be enough to live off, so you may also be able to take out something called a maintenance loan to top up your grant. Your grant or loan will vary according to your personal situation. For example, whether you're full-time or part-time, whether you're living at home or away, and also the household income. We're going to look at that in a moment. So on the screen now is a table with lots of facts and figures, and I don't want you to worry too much about the detail, but the figures are a good example of the sort of money you could expect to receive if you're a student starting in September 2021. It's important to note that these figures are for a student living away from home and outside of London. If a student was living inside London, as it costs more, you might get more money, and if you are living with your parents, you get a little less. What you can see on the right hand side is a figure £10,350, and this amount is what a student can receive to help with living costs regardless of household income. But the important thing to note is that the way the grant and loan are made up is dependent on household income. So for example, if the household income is low, an individual will receive a large grant and a smaller loan, and the opposite if her household income is higher. However, overall, individuals will receive the same total figure. It's important to remember this is in addition to the tuition fee loan, but we're already getting an amount of almost £10,500 to help you live. So let's look at a specific example. We've got Mr. H here, and Mr. H's household income is £35,000 per year. So Mr. H, as a student, would receive £5,208 of free money in the form of a maintenance grant. Remember, this is money that is never paid back. And to top this up, they could also apply for £5,142 in the form of a maintenance loan. And this is money that will be paid back. Remember, this would allow them to overall have £10,350 per year to help pay for rent and food and a little partying maybe. So on top of the support you get from government, there is also sometimes support that specific universities you apply to can provide. And usually this is in the form of bursaries and scholarships, which are essentially another type of grant. You don't have to pay back this money. It's paid every year to help you. A scholarship is normally for a student who excels in a specific area. For example, they might be an excellent sports person. Basically, the university wants you to go to their university so you can win them prizes. So it's a sort of incentive to get you to go to their specific university. There are also, on similar lines, academic scholarships. So, for example, if you've excelled at school or in your A-levels, you've got 3 A stars at university, you might be able to get an academic scholarship. This is in addition to a maintenance loan or a grant, and it really is worth looking into because not everybody knows about them. So I'd recommend you Googling the university you might be interested in to see if this is something they might offer. In addition, bursaries are often offered to students from low-income backgrounds. Again, this is on the basis of household income. And it's really worth looking into because quite a lot of money can be received through bursaries. They can be up to over £2,000 every year. There's also something called tuition fee waivers, if you remember the tuition fees we talked about earlier. These are also offered by some universities if you're from a low-income background or if you're studying some NHS-related courses. It's essentially more free money and is really something that is worth looking into and doing a bit of research around. So when you finish university, it will be time to start repaying your loans. So what happens in relation to this? Now, the amount you've borrowed every year in the form of tuition fees and in the form of maintenance loans will be added together. And this is very important because this is the part that puts students off going to university. Anyone who is half decent at maths will realise, well, if I'm borrowing £9,000 a year to study and £1,000 to live off, that adds up to quite a lot of debt. Now, the biggest message for me is to understand that student debt is unlike any other form of debt in life. And this is for several reasons. The first reason is that you only pay back what you can afford to do so. And the current threshold for this is £27,295 a year. So you only start paying back when you're earning above that amount. So that's very important. And then you only pay back 9% of anything you earn above this amount. This is the key difference. If you lose your job, you stop paying it back. If you start off on a low paid job, you don't start to pay back your loan until you've reached that threshold. And this is very different to any other form of debt, such as a car or a mobile phone. If you can't afford to pay it, you won't pay it. And also, after 30 years, your debt is just written off. Interest is charged to you for the privilege of borrowing a loan. However, it's not a huge amount and it doesn't really impact on how much you pay back each month. Basically, you pay back each month based on what you are earning. So let's look at some specific examples. So on the screen now you can see a table with lots of figures in, and you'll notice the first figure, 27,295, is the figure I mentioned previously being a threshold. And at that point you still don't have to make any repayment. It's only above this amount. So you're on £27,295 a year or £2,274 a month. You don't have to make back any monthly loan repayments. If you get to £28,000 per year, your monthly income is £2,333. You would then start to pay back £5 a month. and at 29,500 you're above the threshold by 2,458, and you would start to pay back £16 per month. Just going to look at that one in a little bit more detail on the right hand side of this screen. So our individual is earning £29,500 per year, and the threshold is £27,295. So the difference between those two figures is £2,205, and you will be paying 9% of that difference, and that is £16 per month. Okay, so I'm not going to go into too much detail about applying for finance, but it is definitely something worth thinking about and being aware of. It's an online application you do in year 13. Once you've applied for university, you can basically apply for finance. And if you're in Wales, you apply to Student Finance Wales. Now, you do need the support of your parents or carers, because there are parts of the online form that they need to fill out. So it is worth talking to them early to make sure they're prepared to do that. As soon as the applications open, which is usually around about the end of February, in the final year of your school, year 13, I would recommend you start to make your application, because it does take quite a while to complete. You don't have to have decided which university you're going to. You can talk to Student Finance later to let them know your firm choice and your insurance choice. It is worth mentioning at some point on the form you will have to tick a box which allows Student Finance Wales permission to share information with universities you've applied to. People are obviously very concerned about sharing data nowadays, but it's really important you do tick this box, because if you don't, the universities you apply to won't know if you're eligible for the bursaries we talked about earlier. So I'd recommend you are ticking that box when you're doing your application. So I hope you found that interesting and you found it useful. So I'm just going to go through some of the key points that were made in the presentation. University is obviously expensive, but the key point to go home with is you don't have to be rich to go to university. There's lots of financial support available. Tuition fees are often talked about and the bit that people worry about, but that really is the easy bit. A full tuition fee loan covers the cost of going to university, it covers the fees. But grants and loans are also available, as we've seen, to help you live. You only start repaying the loans you've taken out when you finish university and start earning more than this £27,295 threshold. And that's really, really important. If you don't start earning above that amount, you won't have to repay any of the loan. And after 30 years, the loan is written off. Your monthly payments won't be that high and you'll be on a decent salary anyway, so it really isn't something you should worry about. So thank you very much for listening. I hope you found that interesting and I hope you found that useful. If you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to mail us at office@themullanyfund.org. That's office@themullanyfund.org. Good luck with your applications. I hope they go well, and do come back to us if you have any further questions. Thank you. Bye bye.